VP dun sa ID.
Bill is now in the hands of the president for his signature, even as some lawmakers in the House have urged their colleagues not to transmit the bill yet because of constitutional questions and because they want a further review of the bill. If the bill is enacted or signed into law, what will it hope to accomplish? And is there really no stopping the anti-terror bill? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to the special episode of The Chiefs. With me right now are Anamani Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, Luchi Cruz Valdez of News 5, and Robbie Alampay of One News. But before we proceed with tonight's interview, here is a sneak peek of our team's interview with the PLDT Chairman Manny V. Pangilinan regarding the country's national ID system.
We've been encouraging that actually the government. I think it's merely more of a government decision. No? I think if I recall correctly, there has been passed a national ID law.
Yes, sir.
But it is not compulsory. I think it is. As I understand, it's going to be done in phases. And
yes, sir. It was supposed to roll out fully this year.
Yeah, but it's not compulsory. So it's done in stages. As I understand it, and it's optional. Mahirap yun. Then you don't know. Mahirap ang contact tracing, di ba? Kung hindi mo kilala. The ability of, for example, the financial institutions to lend money to people if they know who you are. It's hard, di ba? Yung KYC which is the basic tenet of lending.
Yeah, know your client. Yes, sir.
Oh, tsaka yung contact tracing. The best examples of countries that immediately responded to the virus were Korea and Taiwan, because at the onset of the pandemic, they went immediately into the data, building a database for those people who got affected and the people that they interacted with. So using credit card information, phone information, and so forth and so on. So subject, of course, to the relevant data privacy laws that may be applicable in their country. So I think I think there's an inherent fear of a national data system as being Aurelian in nature, no? That I know who you are and so forth. But there are many, many advantages to having that in terms of your driver's license, car registration, passports, POEA, and not to mention cash subsidies. Kasi if you could disperse directly to the individual recipients.
Yeah, the Social Amelioration Fund, for example.
And then the banking system, financial institutions can help out because kung kilala nila kung sino yun, di ba? About 60-70% of our people don't have bank accounts. So yun. So I don't think we should be afraid of that. No?
And that was Mr. Manny V. Pangilinan, Chairman of PLDT, as well as Head of TV5 and also Signal TV, where you are watching us right now. Mr. Pangilinan was inside the TV5 complex earlier today for PLDT's first virtual stockholders meeting, a new normal brought about by the COVID pandemic. Please catch the full interview tomorrow morning on Business World Live here on One News. Now let's bring back our hosts, our co-hosts, Luchi, Ami, and Robbie.
Nawala.
Freeze yata. Anong balita? Anyway, yun yung pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Anong balita
software
sa...
and how it can help address future crises. For example, yung pag-distribute ng Social Amelioration Fund. It could have helped now, and it could help in the future, for example, distributing funds to victims of disasters and other crises.
He had suggested that before. he said that the quickest way daw was to have Globe and Smart subscribers registered. Yung prepaid lalo. Para nga naman, if you total that, it comes up to about 100 or so million, no? So, kumbaga, madaling mag-contact tracing, madaling magbigay ng SAP, di ba? And, yun, I think it's a good idea.
Oo nga,
Although he was
contact tracing.
although he was bewailing the fact that yung ID system is not yet mandatory. It's still voluntary. At least this phase is still voluntary.
In fact, that's what Big Lacson is using now as an argument to push the anti-terror bill. Kasi parang he was saying nga naman na, ayan na naman tayo, pag merong bill sa national ID, nagagalit. So tuloy, hold back. Ngayon, eto na naman, anti-terror bill. And then when you badly need it, wala kang law. I mean, he used that as an argument. I remember.
No, but I think precisely the point is when you talk to people about the national ID system as something that not only can facilitate but enables a lot of things that can be facilitated, people appreciate it. It can cut red tape. It can help to put people immediately included in fintech. It facilitates opening of bank accounts. It empowers people. But then, iba naman talaga yung usapan pagdating sa,
safeguards.
as it applies to national security. Ibang usapan talaga.
Yes. Really, the question is safeguards and whether we trust that there will be no abuse of the information available, no? So, yun. So, tama.
With that in mind.
Yeah.
Let's bring in our guest tonight. Our guest tonight is Attorney Domingo Cayosa. He is the president, of course, of the IBP, the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. Let's bring in Attorney Cayosa. Sir,
evening,
are you there? Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening po, and thank you for joining us, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening,
Sir,
Chiefs.
well,
Good evening.
clearly, kasi the past few days... Hi, sir. Yes, sir.
Good
Sir,
evening,
in the past
Chiefs.
few days,
Good
yung
evening,
congressmen have
Lucci.
been trying to get the numbers. Okay, sir. Sir, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear, sir? Yeah, okay. Yes, sir.
Ikaw ang may delay.
Ikaw ang may delay.
Ako may delay.
Ikaw ang may delay.
Ikaw. Okay, kaming lahat. Ikaw lang ang delayed. Okay, FYI.
Hindi ko pwedeng sabihin kung ano yung provider ko ng internet.
Delay.
Ate na lang yun.
Okay.
Okay. Well, sir, in the past few days, congressmen have been trying to get the numbers, to roll up the numbers dun sa kung sino yung nag-abstain o sino yung nag-no doon sa anti-terror bill. They were hoping to have the bill reverted back to Congress. Pero kanina, ang sabi ng Malacanang, Pangulo na, so clearly it's too late to revert the bill to Congress. So the Supreme Court is the next battleground. Now, the IBP, through you, has taken the position that there are unconstitutional provisions in the bill. Sir, run us through the provisions that you think are problematic as far as the Constitution is concerned.
But let me just properly lay the premise. We agree that we need an anti-terrorism law
Okay.
and that it should be effective and adequate to address the nuances of terrorism. However, it is our duty as lawyers, as a professional organization, to point out possible constitutional infirmities. And particularly, number one, under the Constitution, it is clear that the power to issue warrants of arrest is with the judiciary, no other branch of government. In Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill, the Anti-Terrorism Council, which is not a court, it is not a quasi-judicial body, it is an executive body, is given the authority to issue written authority for law enforcement agencies or the military to arrest and detain suspected terrorists. So to our mind, that power given to the ATC is beyond the ambit of the Constitution. Secondly, under the Constitution, even in the most extreme circumstances of an invasion or a rebellion, when the existence of the republic is at stake, the president, as commander-in-chief, can declare martial law, and or suspend the writ of habeas corpus. When the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus is suspended under those extreme emergencies, still the Constitution requires that anyone who's arrested, even under those circumstances, must be charged within 3 days. The
So mas
issue now
malala pa
is,
pala.
the issue now is, does the Constitution set a limit of 3 days that is clearly violated by the 14 days or 24 days that the terrorist suspect can be detained without being formally charged in court. So these are two glaring
Yeah.
provisions that may run counter to the constitutional limitations and guarantees.
Hmm.
Okay. So,
Attorney, what about when it comes to the
Sir, yung sa Section
definition of
29,
what might be terroristic? Are there constitutional concerns about whether or not the definitions of terroristic acts could be overbroad or vague?
Well, that is true because basic in law is no one may be deprived of life, liberty, property without due process of law. Due process of law requires that before you are punished for anything, the basis should be clear. In this, so there is some truth to the claim and the fear of many, especially the critics of government, that unless it is clarified and very specifically uh, limited and defined, the terrorist or a terrorist organization can practically be anyone. So in the hands of an abusive government, it is possible that this can be weaponized against the critics. So that's another area. It's not directly in contravention of any constitutional provision, but it may violate the due process clause. And that's why many are also attacking it from that angle.
Now, attorney, we say that the next battleground is the Supreme Court. Process-wise, do we need to have a test case to bring it to the Supreme Court, or is the conservative here enough for the IBP or any advocate to go to the Supreme Court kahit wala pang test case?
But just a slight correction, Robbie. The next battleground, if I may use your term, is not the Supreme Court. It's still the office of the president. And that's why we are addressing the same concerns to the office of the president. And we are hoping and requesting that the office of the president reviews the law, especially those constitutionally uh, suspect or questionable provisions, because in the past, President Duterte, has in the past vetoed laws or provisions of laws that are unconstitutional. So we hope
sir,
that
can you,
this.
can you enlighten us on this process? So, uh, if the president, upon the recommendation of the Department of Justice, decides that certain provisions of this bill be amended, babalik po ba yan sa Kongreso? Ano po ang proseso?
Okay, one, it need not be the Department of Justice to advise the president. Anyone can, or even the president
Okay.
himself, after
All
reading
right.
the law, before signing it, can find some questionable provisions, doubtful ones, and he wants to be faithful to the Constitution. He can veto it and tell Congress why he's vetoing it and what portions of the law he sees objectionable. Then the process is the law goes back to Congress.
Okay.
The Congress can actually override the veto of the president. Regardless of what the president does, the Congress can, by a vote of two-thirds,
Yes.
override the veto, and the bill will become a law with or without the president's signature. Because normally Congress passes a law by simple majority, 50% plus one. So pwede nilang override yan. It's also possible that Congress listens to the president, and I suppose they would listen to the president because anyway, in our system of government, the president is usually the political leader of the country, and the majority of the senators and congressmen are political allies of the president. So most probably, if he vetoes it, then Congress will refine and improve the law to take away those objectionable or unconstitutional provisions so that it is resent to the president for his signature.
Attorney Cayosa, you're
Pero
talking
sir,
about
realistically, sige po.
battleground, being Malacanang, ano? And the Senate passed this law in February pa. And then the President certified it as urgent, kaya pinasa ng House, even in the middle of this pandemic. Anong chance nyo na the President will not sign this? And if you're going to appeal to him at this point na na-certify na niya yan as urgent, ano yung pinaka-main points nyo that you think might change his mind? Kasi pati si Foreign Affairs Secretary Teddy Boy
Teddy
Locsin,
Locsin.
na maligaya na siya dito sa ano to, and any further amendments daw baka ipamigay na natin, baka yung ano ang may benefit na daw yung mga terorista. Ano yung tingin yung magiging argument that might convince the president to change his mind about something that he's certified as urgent?
Well, you're correct. It may be a long shot to get the president to veto it. But in the past, he has done so. The fact that he certified this as urgent also signals the desire of the administration to have a new anti-terrorism law. Now, the most telling or the most potent argument against the signing would be, of course, the unconstitutionality of a few provisions. But again, the president can also make a political calculation and say, okay, you can challenge that before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court declares those provisions unconstitutional, anyway, only those provisions will be rendered void and the rest of the law will still be effective. So he can also do that for exigency. But the president, being a lawyer, might also want that the whole law be improved so that it doesn't run into any constitutional questions.
Okay, if we go by your recommendations, yes. What would you rather see revised or completely struck off the present bill?
Well, as far as IBIT is concerned, as a professional organization, we focus on the clearly unconstitutional or constitutionally questionable provisions. One is the usurpation of the powers of the judiciary by the Anti-Terrorism Council. Secondly, the seemingly too long a period before they can charge, because it
Right.
appears from the provisions of the Constitution that the intent of the Constitution is to limit the detention of a suspect to a maximum of 3 days. So these are the two provisions that we would want to focus on as an
Pero dun sa,
organization.
pero hindi ho ba dun sa current law, yung security, yung
Home Security Act.
yes.
Home Security Act.
Human Security
Hindi
Act.
ho ba, yes, yung sa human
Human
security.
Human
Hindi ho
Security
ba na yung ATC, wala rin siyang judicial powers? Pero yun, naging batas.
Well, precisely. Even if that may be the case, the constitutional issue does not go away. If in the past that was not noted, it does not stop anyone from raising it now. Perhaps taken as a whole, people were too accepting of the Human Security Act. Now that we have the anti-terrorism law, people are more discerning and they are focusing on specific provisions, because the other parts of the law are okay, and we should really have an anti-terrorism law that is adequate to address the threats of terrorism and the different forms nowadays. Except that if we can have an anti-terrorism law that does not violate the Constitution, that's the way to go.
Pero attorney, hindi ba yung ino-authorize niya is warrantless?
Pero sir, yung 2007
Pwede ba mag-issue yung ATC ng ganong power na warrantless arrest lang? Hindi ba yun yung nakalagay doon na warrantless arrest is not constitutional? Yung ATC pwede ka mag-authorize ng warrantless arrest, and then after the warrantless arrest, you have to notify the nearest court and the Commission on Human Rights about the warrantless arrest. Yun, constitutional ba yun?
No, it is not. It is not because warrantless arrest under the rules of court and the Constitution may only be allowed under three very strict circumstances. The law enforcer has personal knowledge that a crime is being committed, has been committed, or is about to be committed in his presence, and he has reasonable ground to believe that the person being arrested is the one has committed or will commit the crime. So personal knowledge. Itong Anti-Terrorism Council, they don't really do themselves as a body, the law enforcement. They are not there at the scene of the crime. So they're acting like a court. And if you look at the wording of Section 29, it says warrantless arrest. But if you look at it, it says that any military or police or law enforcement agent who is authorized in writing to arrest an officer or a suspect, a terror suspect, need not charge that person within a period of 14 days. So, malinaw doon that it is like a court authorizing in writing. What is an authority in writing to detain and to arrest? That's a warrant of arrest. And under the Constitution, that's exclusively the power of the judiciary and independent branch of government.
Pero ang problema
Attorney, you talk about
it's a mahirap. Paano yung crime is plotting? Mahirap patunayan yung plotting. Paano kung yun invoke nung you're an intelligence officer, you're gathering intelligence, you need to detain this person to foil an attack. At yun ang tatapinin ng basis for a warrantless arrest. Hindi pa naman you're trying to stop an attack. Paano
That's the nature of terrorism. It's not that it's really surreptitious, it's not in secret, and a lot of intelligence work is needed to actually catch them in the act. And it's not even really a visible act. How do you
if that is the case, if the law enforcement agencies, the police, military, or intelligence units have information, reliable information of their own personal knowledge that they are plotting and about to launch a terroristic attack, then under the ordinary rule, then they can arrest. They can arrest. You don't need the ATC as a collegial body to authorize you, because when that is the case, that will be covered by the exception under the rules of court and under existing laws that you can actually arrest.
Yeah, Attorney, if I may, I'd like to back up a bit from that. I think you mentioned specific mechanisms, particularly the mechanism of the EPC and how much broader and how much bigger their powers are here. And then the problematic unconstitutionality of the length of detention, potentially. And you say na, well, maybe kung dalawang to matanggal, that's certainly an improvement. But I'd like to back up all the way to what we were discussing earlier, which is the very definition of what terrorism is. One, if my understanding of my reading of legal analysis here is correct, one impression that I get is there is a very, very real difference in how terrorism is defined in the HSA of 2007 and the Anti-Terror Bill of 2020. And one of the more striking things that I read is that is lawyers saying that in the HSA, very specific yung acts. If you commit an act of murder, arson, damage to property, these are immediately the first elements to defining terrorism. And then there's intent, and then there's effect. But in the Anti-Terror Act, they say yung definition hindi na specific crimes yung first element. It's just replaced by one word: acts. Any act that can have this effect doesn't have to be murder, doesn't have to be murder. So I bring it back to the question of terrorism beyond the mechanisms that you said. Maybe if we take it out it will improve. But there remains that fundamental problem of how terrorism is defined here, and to be precise, how terrorism has a broader definition and a vaguer definition here.
You're correct, Robbie, and that's one area that is under question now, because for a criminal law to serve or to be compliant with due process, it must be specific and clear enough to put on notice the citizen what action to avoid. So, the ordinary crimes, if you commit them to sow terror and indiscriminate violence or fear among the populace, that's terrorism. In this particular act, and it's practically any act may be considered terrorism depending on the perceived purpose. The problem is uh, can be a reason or a ground for them to arrest you, detain you for 14 days, maximum of 24 days. And it will be much later that you will be asked to explain and then you go free. But what happens in 14, 24 days could be terrible to any ordinary citizen who is innocent.
Uh, pero sir, di ba explicit din na sinabi ron na hindi kasama sa terrorist acts ang dissent, advocacy, mass actions, work stoppage. It's very explicit. Is that not enough to as a safeguard against unconstitutional arrests?
Well, in that case already, Lucci, people are now going to the issue of trust. If we trust government, we trust the police, the security forces, and they understand what that means and they will respect it, then people did not complain. Unfortunately, compared to the other countries being cited by Senator Lacson, Australia, Malaysia, and Singapore, the trust level and the experience of the people in those countries is not the same as that in the Philippines. Unfortunately, I would say. And that is why people believe that if things are nebulous, they might become the victims rather than the citizens being protected from terror. So again, it's a matter of trust. But for us, IBP, we don't delve on that. That's for the other groups to point out. But I see the reason why they object to those
Attorney,
things.
I can understand when you say that when it comes to issues of trust and political, it strays into politics, and therefore this is not the area of the IBP. But beyond the question of trust, that exception, that provision that Lucci cited, it also goes on to say that this is protected speech. But it also adds, as Attorney Ted says, an exception to an exception, which is that it is protected speech if it does not have the effect or the intent of intimidating government and sowing terror and so on. In other words, there is an exception to the exception, which then brings you back to the question of whether or not the impact on this on freedom of expression is potentially unconstitutional. So doesn't that make this, if it goes not to an issue of trust, but precisely to an issue of how this is worded and what will be the effect, that will still have to be. Doesn't that make the argument that this is still a legal question that the IPP can touch on?
It can. As a matter of fact, it can. And if there's any petition filed before the Supreme Court by IPP or many other groups or any other group, that can also be raised. But what I'm saying is, as far as we're concerned, we first focus on these two because they're very clear provisions of the
I
Constitution.
see. Hmm.
Attorney Cayosa, several years ago, human rights groups also questioned a provision on the earlier anti-terror bill, in 2007 anti-terror bill law, which allowed for non-judicial arrests of up to 3 days. Basically, the same thing
Exactly.
as what we have now, except that
Yes.
it's 14 days plus 10.
Yeah.
Yung
Yes.
dati kasi ATC allowed to issue
Three.
arrest orders for 3 days. Now
Yes.
that petition was junked by the Supreme Court, I think, for
Right.
lack of legal standing by the human rights groups. What
Right.
makes this particular case different from what the Supreme Court did several years ago to a similar provision?
Well, one is the length of time. if you notice, in the past, in the Human Security Act, it was only 3 days, so well within the limit that we think is prescribed by the Constitution, even in extraordinary circumstances. 3 days. In this particular case, the limit is 14 days, extendable to 24 days. Now, the fact that the Supreme Court, in the earlier case, questioning the constitutionality of the power of the Anti-Terrorism Council under the old Human Security Act was junked by the Supreme Court, it doesn't mean that this Supreme Court will also junk it. Perhaps they will cite that as a precedent, but we hope and we believe that if raised properly, members of the Supreme Court, and many of them are new members, may be convinced that this time the Supreme Court should stand and uphold the clear letter and intent of the Constitution vis-a-vis this work of Congress.
Yes, sir. But sir, for non-lawyers, sir, for non-lawyers, what was the Supreme Court looking for in that earlier case when it said that there was a lack of legal standing by the human rights groups? What was the Supreme Court looking for then?
Well, it was looking for an actual case. And,
Okay.
that's one,
Yeah.
the Supreme Court is supreme, so they can change the rules. The general rule is if you don't have an actual controversy, you're not yet damaged, you're not yet prejudiced, then you just can run to the Supreme Court. But then also, in some instances, the Supreme Court say this is of transcendental importance. Even if that's not the case, we'll still look into it. So they can change the rules. So that's why it's not a definite rule. It's also possible that this time, if these constitutional violations are raised and it is very clear, then the Supreme Court need not require actual damage. As a matter of fact, in many cases also in the past, the Supreme Court allowed an taxpayer suit petitions questioning the constitutionality of many laws. So just a mere taxpayer entitles you to question them. You don't need to be arrested. You don't need to be a suspected terrorist.
Okay, so Atty. Cayosa, I mean, this rounds us back. We're running out of time for this gap, but this rounds us back to an earlier question. You've clarified na no, the next battleground is not yet the Supreme Court. The next battleground is still having moral suasion over the president. Baka makumbinsi pang ang presidente. But on the theory that he might sign and this will become law and this will go to the Supreme Court, is that the argument that the IPB will make? Is the argument going to be that this is of transcendental importance? Huwag tayo magantay may masampulan and let's go straight to the Supreme Court.
Yes, we will do that. And we will cite also many precedents where the Supreme Court entertained petitions questioning constitutionality of a law merely on a taxpayer's suit case. So we will do that. And at the end of the day, it will be the Supreme Court who will decide these constitutional questions.
All right.
Okay. Attorney Domingo Cayosa, President of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Attorney.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
sir.
Tayong lahat.
Thank you.
And please don't go away. The Chiefs will be right back.
Welcome back to the Chiefs. We're now in the final stage of our conversation, and we'd like to welcome our next guest, Attorney Jose Jesus Dicini Jr. He's a cybercrime law expert. Welcome po, Attorney JJ.
Thank you po.
Good evening po. We're
Good
with you,
evening.
Chi Cruz, Valdez, Ed
Hi,
Lingao,
sir.
and Bialampay.
Hi, sir.
Good evening.
Good
Yeah.
evening.
Ako ulit.
Okay,
Ayun.
another raging issue, yung pong cloning ng Facebook. Wala po ako sa social media, I'm not even on Twitter, pero I understand yung fears po ng mga na-clone na baka daw gamitin yung mga account nila for things na that could land them not only an indictment but in jail, considering what's happening ngayon in recent weeks. How valid is that fear, attorney?
Okay. So it's happened before where an individual he gets locked out of his Facebook account. He doesn't know why, and while he is locked out of his Facebook account, an equivalent or something that looks like his Facebook account, so therefore his profile picture was copied and the banner was copied. On that other account, a threat to the life of a public official was posted, which was a crime, and this individual was charged with the crime. And as a result, he didn't have the resources to defend himself, so therefore he had to, in effect, go into hiding until that case disappears or is archived. So there is a potential threat that while you are locked out of your Facebook, your legitimate Facebook account, your account may be used for other reasons. Yes.
Nakakatakot. So, anong pwedeng gawin agad?
Clarify ko lang yun. You were locked out, I mean, this person was locked out of his account, and then it was his account that was used to, it wasn't a fake account na in-screenshot lang, it was really his account.
No. They made a fake account, but they copied the elements of the fake account, copied the elements of the legitimate
I see.
account.
Okay.
So that visually it looks the same.
Yeah,
But
like
actually, the interesting
Yes.
thing was, if you look at the URL, the URL is different, right? So, for example, your URL might be facebook.com/Robbie Alampay, right? But this fake account will have a different URL. It'll be
I
Robbie, Facebook/whatever. And but despite that, right, it's not enough it's not clear that the prosecutors will dismiss the case, meaning there is actual basis for the prosecutors to continue with the case, and that's really the danger. That okay, you will eventually win, you will eventually be acquitted, but it might take a lot of time and effort on your part.
Hinasel ka ng hinasel pa.
Yes.
Sa huli,
And if
you spend money, you spend time
Naisahan
trying
ka
to
na.
get the case dismissed.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so
measure dyan? How can we prevent?
ako naman technically, attorney, kasi expert ka dyan eh. Of course, Facebook has yet to come up with the results of its investigation, but offhand, what theories can you put forward as to how this was done and why?
Well, if I'm going to be, I'm going to play conspiracy theory, I could say that the reason is precisely to create this kind of discussion that we're having now, fear, right? And so people will be afraid if their Facebook account will be used against them, and therefore as a way to stop conversation about this issue. So in a sense, you could argue that it's already working.
You're talking about what issue? The anti-terror bill?
Or well, because that's currently under discussion. So there's a possibility that that is the discussion that they don't want people to have. So that's
Attorney, is there any way for social media users to protect themselves against this? Meron bang is there any technical remedy for this?
what I would suggest, I think the problem is that if the reason why they're targeting Facebook is because Facebook is very popular in the Philippines. A lot of people engage in discussions on Facebook, and it's a very popular platform in which to change people's minds about things. And so, knowing that those who are trying to manipulate this platform are trying to push out dissent by threatening them this way, and therefore giving this sense that that everybody is in agreement. But I think over the long run, it's very bad for Facebook. If people cannot believe their social media because people there are cowed into submission, what will happen is I think users will abandon Facebook because they
Okay,
can't
but
use it or rely
actually
on it.
marami na ngang nagagalit sa Facebook. Yeah.
Continuing to prod you on your conspiracy theory. Yung binanggit mo kaninang kaso, and even Ed can attest to that, no? Merong mga nananadya, fake yung account. But even as the NBI is still investigating and Facebook is still investigating on the technical aspects here, is it safe to say that yung dinescribe mo and what Ed experiences every so often is a totally different animal because of the scale that we saw over the weekend? I mean, thousands of people were affected. Again, to prod you on your conspiracy theory on who might be behind this, clearly who is behind this has a technical savvy as well as resources beyond an individual na gusto lang manghassle ng isa pang tao.
Yes, well, they have teams, no? There are people, there are farms of people. This is well known for many years now. I think there was a report. I can't. It must be about more than 10, 12 years ago of Facebook farms operating out of in the Philippines, actually out of Cebu, where one individual is responsible for maybe 200 or 300 Facebook accounts. So it's not difficult for them to create these fake accounts and to engage in this kind of activity. I think we have to consider that it is in Facebook's interest not for this to continue. And so I would imagine that if there are very real fears on the part of Filipinos that they may be exploited through Facebook, if Facebook does not take proactive steps to protect the platform, then they themselves might actually suffer, right? Because
That's
people
right.
will
They've been
abandon the platform.
Yes, Facebook has been getting a really bad rap over not just this, but we recall the days of the elections, not just here, but also in the US, and the involvement of this Cambridge Analytica. What is it that stops Facebook from actually putting up safeguards, in spite of the fact that time and again it has been used in this manner in order to manipulate opinion?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a difficult. So that is a different. That's what's happening in the U.S. Right here. We're seeing manipulation, but I think in this particular problem with all these fake accounts, I think Facebook can take a very simple action. They could very quickly and very easily come out publicly, maybe come up with a facility where Facebook will say, like through a local representative, this is a fake Facebook account, this is a fake Facebook account. So therefore, you can then have this statement from Facebook, some evidence that you can show to the police, right? That account is a fake Facebook account, and therefore, hopefully, that will make it more difficult, right, for these people if they're trying to get you into trouble, right? There's basis now for the prosecutor to dismiss cases because Facebook itself is saying this is a fake account. You cannot attribute it to this person because his legitimate account is this account, right?
But you're saying that there's no way for them to keep this from happening even before it happens?
That's
Yeah.
okay. You know. Okay, so it's possible that people have it's very hard to write that as a policy. It's possible that people have the same names, but
Yeah.
sometimes what's interesting is we know that Facebook scans people's faces, and because this because when there's a picture that you upload and you don't tag a person, right?
Oh yeah,
Facebook
yeah.
tells you, is
There's a
this so
recommendation.
and so? Right.
Mm.
So they have facial recognition technology. So one would think that if they have facial recognition technology, if somebody puts up an account and that account is uses a picture, a profile picture of somebody, and it's a person who already has a legitimate account, you would
Yes.
think it's possible, if they wanted to send you an alert that your
Yes.
picture appears in somebody else's profile picture. You may want to check it out, right?
Yeah. Uh,
Exactly. So
Yes.
actually,
what's
that's a good
keeping them
point
from
because I
doing
mean
that? That's my
there
point.
are
Yeah.
sorry,
Go
ah.
ahead.
I mean, I just
Keeping
Both
them
wanted
of
to
you
from
guys.
address
doing
that
that.
point. No, because that's a
What's
true, that's
keeping
a
them? Yeah,
real
go ahead.
point. That's a real point because there are banks right now that, as part of their KYC, their Know Your Client protocols, already use facial recognition to not only enroll an account, but to
Yes.
verify who you are.
Yes.
It's technology that is already being used by banks.
Correct. That's why
Mm.
they have you take a picture of your ID, and then you take a picture with the ID.
That's
They can
right,
do
Right.
live
facial
picture.
recognition.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes, and they
Mm.
can even determine if you're alive by making you nod or making you blink.
Yeah,
Mm.
tapos kung minsan, di ba, yung merong, are you human? I mean, may mga ganyan. I'm just saying, I mean, why is Facebook not doing something like that now?
Okay, so I mean I think so. If I were to guess, a lot of these. So this isn't the first time that this has happened. We've had other situations before where you have an individual who uses an account that causes harm to others, and as a result, they you ask the online provider to please stop stop this account from being used, and the provider does nothing. And the reason is because the provider is actually making, that's traffic to their site, and so it's advantageous for them to keep that site running, or
Mm.
that particular account running. So in a sense, Facebook is trying to grow its user base, so that's probably one way. And of course, I think it also is, there might be a technical difficulty on the part of Facebook to figure out whether this account is a legitimate account or not a legitimate account. So it's really a tricky thing. But I think one way to solve this is maybe the national ID. So when we have the national ID system in place, then one way that you can show that that's not your Facebook page is because your national ID is not used to create that page, right?
Oh,
That
Attorney,
will
you're talking about safeguards in the national ID system. You're also talking about the accountability, and for that matter, the market forces that can bear upon Facebook. We're not talking about accountability of the people themselves who actually did this, who gamed the Facebook system, who are doing this, who are creating this. I just want to ask from a very pragmatic level, are we not talking about that because sa totoo lang, imposibleng mahanap yung mga taong gumawa nito?
Well, that you're talking about a system design of the internet itself. So the internet was not designed for strong identity because it wasn't an issue when they designed the system. So the fact that there's anonymity baked into the internet is just part of its nature and something
Mm.
that cannot be avoided. Perhaps future iterations of the internet or maybe versions of the internet will have stronger identity
Mm.
systems in place. Certainly, in places like what we see in islands, say banking or finance, identity is very strongly enforced. So it's not
Mm.
impossible for companies to do that. It's just that in a lot of startups now, the push is to have as many users as you can, and therefore having to vet users is a disincentive on the part of a company trying to
that's
grow
right.
its business.
Yes. Yes.
Attorney, kumusta yung status ng prosecution ng cybercrime laws in the Philippines? Like yung case sa Cebu that you mentioned, was anyone ever prosecuted or even
Uh,
charged?
Well, the one in Cebu was really just an operation. It was a magazine that featured them. They were not committing any crimes. In terms of cybercrime prosecution, yes, there have been a number of cybercrime prosecutions that have happened in the country, and we do have resources to do that. More is needed in terms of upgrading skills and upgrading resources. So it's a challenge for the government, and in a sense, I think the experience with the Human Security Act, they saw the difficulty, and I think that's what they're trying to address here, which means more power for law enforcement, which is getting people very nervous, and I think that's where we are right now.
Okay.
Right.
Sir, before we let you go, I'd like to ask you one more question about yung itong sa nangyari sa Facebook. Kayo ba, sir, did you check if you have a ghost account?
I did. There's one, but it was a weird account that was created last year, and then there are only 2 people following and no friends. So it's obviously not me. So I figured
Well,
it's not.
but I meant to ask you, kasi si Ari kasi walang problema yun dahil nakapackable pa niya hanggang ngayon eh. But I meant to ask you,
Ako 5 kaibigan kong Ami Pamintuan sa Facebook. 5 ang pinirate ko sa Facebook na Ami Pamintuan.
well, sir, I meant to ask you, number 1, how do you check? And number 2, what do you do if you find? And number 3, how do you prevent it? Or is there anything you can do at all to prevent in the future? So number 1, how do you check?
Yeah. So what I do, well, in my case, kasi my name is very unusual, right? So the Dicinis are all related to each other. So I just enter my name. What you can do, actually, what some people do is they reverse their names. So actually, I was saying I could be Yaj Sinisid, right? Or Inisid. So it's reverse the spelling of the name. And therefore, you know
May
that that's me.
nabibis ko tuloy siya sa password niya.
Some people do that. I think that's a way to sort of take a defensive action.
Yes, sir.
If you think about it, probably over the longer term, the reason why people get into trouble online is not because of the type of discussion that happens on Facebook. It's very sort of people fighting each other. I liken it to a discussion in a karinderya or in a tindahan, right? Where people speak their mind. I think if we rise the level of or lift the level of debate on Facebook, then I think these kinds of shenanigans probably won't work. So but perhaps that's the long-term solution. Reason
Yes, sir.
will eventually
Well,
prevail.
I ask about that kasi some people take the extra step of searching for their names using somebody else's account kasi baka blinak sila ng gumawa ng fake account. That way they don't know that there's a fake account existing.
Yes, or what you can do is you can log in using there's a way to set up your browser where it takes out all your identifying. It's like you're coming in clean, so all your cookies are disabled. So Facebook doesn't even know who you are when you enter. You know, your browser gives you away because of the way it's configured, because of the cookies that are there. So if you there's a way to set up your browser. Parang it's sort of like an anonymous
Private browsing.
Yeah. So when they go in, you're treated. So some people do this to check on Google, because of course your Google results are if they know who you are, they tweak the results.
All right.
We hope that
Okay.
will help our
Thank you,
viewers.
attorney.
Attorney
Thank you.
J.J. Dicini Jr., marami pong salamat for joining the Chiefs.
Thank you po.
Thank
Maraming
you.
salamat.
Good evening.
Good night.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
That,
O yun, si Ami talaga walang problema.
Yeah. Sino yung ka-chat ko sa Facebook kung hindi pa si Ami Pamintuan yun?
ilang Ami Pamintuan nakita mo? Ilan? 5?
Friend ko, 5 na yung nag-friend sa akin na Ami Pamintuan.
marami pong siguro nga makakatulong kung may national ID tayo. Pero hindi, I'm low-tech, hindi ko alam kung ano ka-epekto niyan. You should tell us, Ted. Nakakatulong ba yun? Ikaw, na-clone ka na eh. Makakatulong ba yun?
National ID, wala. I mean, well, as far as Facebook accounts are concerned with national ID, wala. You don't need naman an ID to make a Facebook account.
Makakatulong eh, di ba? Sabi ni Attorney JJ. Hindi ko maintindihan kung paano makakatulong yan.
Pero maganda yung point
Kapag may
ni Atty.
national
JJ,
ID ka na.
maganda yung point niya that actually one long-term solution here addresses a lot of the problems on the internet. And he didn't say it, but the way I got it was it speaks to digital literacy, media literacy, information literacy. He mentioned it in the context of raising the level of discourse and conversations on Facebook, on the internet, and so on. And one of the things that this episode does, and every time may episode na ganito, it makes all of us more skeptical about anything we see. And as I always say, when you don't believe anything, that's actually a step forward. That's progress. When we can all tell each other that our default is, hindi mo na ako maniniwala.
I
Yung
think, but I think the more telling suggestion he made was the relevance of a national ID system. And I think this also jives with what MVP said earlier, no? And we've seen how the lack of proper identification has really kept government from giving benefits to those who most need it, no? And I think that even on Facebook, no, when you have a national ID with confidential but unified information about who you are, hindi yun mananakaw sa'yo. Even in the
Yes,
same, my son
but
lives there.
Lucy may caveat. Oh, but
No,
Lucy
I
may
know.
caveat dyan. I mean, what I'm saying is, I understand the concept of a national ID system in terms of services, in terms of improving our governance and our way of living, and so on. But as JJ said, there is real reason as well as to why the internet was built this way. And if you're going to take out your national ID system every time you do something on the internet, that also poses a lot of risk. You still have to make the assumption that despite everything that we do, one way or the other, magkakaroon pa rin ng problema. And if all your information is now online on every single site that you use, it still creates more problems and more complexity.
True.
But definitely, when it comes to government, I mean, that's a totally separate, but it's
Well,
totally
kaya nga,
isolated from that.
ibabalik ko rin sa sinabi ni Attorney Cayosa na the problem also is trust. When we don't trust the authorities,
That's right.
nothing can work. There's no
natin.
regularity.
Yeah. Okay. Ed.
Okay, let's wrap it up. And if you wanna catch the full interview with the MVP, it will be aired tomorrow on Bloomberg TV on One News in the morning. So try to catch that. Anyway, that's it for tonight. That will be all for this edition of the Cheese. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Edling of One News.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.